It took me 10 years to repay this debt of honor, not with tears, but with power. If anyone ever thought I was weak, that night was when they realized they had chosen the wrong opponent. Beneath the glimmering crystal lights and the echo of arrogant laughter, I stood there. Like a ghost, at my own family's party. They didn't know who I was, and that made me smile. They still thought I was the same nobody Sophia, just the girl who made coffee and took stupid notes for someone more powerful. They were wrong, and that night was the last night they were allowed to be. The annual Becker family gathering unfolded like it always did. Lavish, suffocating, and soaked in expensive perfume mixed with that all-too-familiar sense of superiority. I walked into Aunt Lorraine's mansion as if I had stepped back in time, a place where every gaze was programmed to judge, assess, and categorize you, like a product on a shelf. My relatives, each dressed like they'd just stepped off the cover of a finance magazine, clustered in little groups, champagne flutes in hand, mouths endlessly bragging about multi-million-dollar deals, flashy job titles, and European vacations like proving their worth was an obligation. I stood in the corner, wearing a simple black dress. Not flashy but just polished enough to avoid being labeled low class. To me, it felt like armor. A thin shield between me and their sharp glances. "Sophia?" Aunt Lorraine's voice cut through, sharp as a razor. "Goodness, I almost didn't recognize you." "Still working as a secretary, sweetheart?" I raised my glass, smiling behind the rim. "I'm an executive assistant, Auntie." She raised an eyebrow, her bright red nails glinting under the chandelier. "Oh, still at that company, Skyline Solutions?" Her tone tinged with pity. "That's cute, but you're smarter than that. Why don't you apply to the Becker Corporation, do some real work?" I pressed my lips together, smiling politely, a habit honed over years. I had never heard words that felt both so casual and so sharp, like a dagger tucked neatly under a silk sleeve. "I already have a job that suits me, thank you for your concern." Before I could turn away, my cousin Mason, the eldest son of Uncle Henry, newly appointed as an investment director at the Miami branch, stepped over. "Skyline, huh? I could help you get into something more stable. I've got a few connections at Becker Corp. Maybe secretary to the strategy team, you'd learn more than just typing." I gave a faint smile. "Thanks, but I'm happy where I am." "You're better than that, Sophia, but sometimes you gotta know where you stand, right?" He winked, then leaned toward his wife. "Sophia's always been laughably independent." I turned away, swallowing the melting ice lodged in my throat. In this family, women weren't allowed to be the center. Women were expected to be stable, to marry well, or at best to be a dedicated assistant to the men running the world. To them, my refusal to join the family business was an act of rebellion. Or worse, a sugar-coated failure. They didn't know I had been living a parallel life. They didn't know who I really was. And I liked it that way. I watched them pass by, one by one, talking down to me, their eyes trying to pierce through the plain black dress that bore no designer label. No one asked me what I needed, wanted, or had accomplished. Because to them I was still the bowed-head Sophia, the obedient one, with no future in a world where power is inherited through bloodlines and gender. I said nothing, but in my mind, a countdown had begun. They had no idea where they stood on the chessboard. But I did. Crystal clear. 10 years ago I stood in this very room, not with their contemptuous glances, but with a naive hope that maybe, just once, they'd look at me with fairness. I was 24 then, a fresh MBA graduate from NYU, my head full of plans, strategy maps, and a burning ambition to change the business world. Starting with my own family. I remember clearly the afternoon I scheduled a meeting with Uncle Henry and Aunt Lorraine at the main office of Becker Group, in Midtown. I wore a cheap suit I had saved up for 3 months to buy, holding a business proposal I had revised 18 times. I arrived early, waited nearly an hour while my uncle's assistant sipped her latte without once glancing my way. Finally, I was called into the conference room, where my uncle sat, legs crossed, twirling a pen like I was just another meaningless meeting in his packed calendar. Aunt Lorraine, true to form, didn't miss a chance to act like she was doing me a favor. "Sophia, what exactly are you trying to do with this little project?" she asked, her voice laced with subtle mockery. I took a deep breath, reminding myself not to let pride get in the way. "I want to start a consulting firm for corporate restructuring. I've done extensive market research. Small and medium businesses often can't afford the big consulting firms, and they need something more practical and flexible. I have the plan, and I need startup capital. Just a small part. $50,000 to begin." Uncle Henry leaned back in his chair, smirking. "You just graduated, no experience, never managed anything beyond a school printer, and you want to start a company? I have the expertise. And I have a clear plan, I believe." "Leave? Then go work for someone first and learn the ropes," he cut me off, his voice firm. "You want to start a business? Start in the mailroom here. Do well for a few years, maybe you'll get moved to admin. Everyone climbs from the bottom, even the men." Aunt Lorraine giggled. "Oh, Henry, you'll scare the poor girl." "But, Sophia, have you thought about getting married? A successful man could help make those little dreams of yours come true. Business is hard for women, honey." I bit my lip. Not because they refused the money, but because they refused to see me as someone with potential. In their eyes, I was just a young woman fresh out of school, a faint shadow on the sidelines of the Becker lineage, where every key position was reserved for men with blood ties. I walked out of that building empty-handed, but my head was on fire. That night I rewrote the entire business plan. Then I sat in front of the mirror, looked myself in the eye, and said, aloud for the first time, "From now on, no one gets to steal your dream. And one day, the very people who look down on you today will sit and listen as you lay out the terms." A few months later, I rented a tiny room above an old ramen shop in Queens. The walls reeked of grease, and I had to wear headphones at lunch to block out the clatter from the kitchen below. But I didn't care. I had an old laptop, the plan in my head, and one thing none of them had. The pain of rejection turned into survival fuel. I started by emailing every small business in the area. Auto shops, print shops, woodwork shops. Anyone floundering near bankruptcy. No one replied the first 2 weeks. But in the third week, a Brooklyn rolling door company responded. They were drowning in tax debt and chaotic inventory management. I met them the next day. No salary demands, no upfront consulting fees, just one shot to prove myself. 3 months later, their revenue was up 60%, and they were no longer at risk of going under. From there, I got more clients. Not many, but enough to survive. And, step by step, I laid the foundation for the empire they said I could never build. I didn't need their support. I needed them to be wrong, so I could be right. In a way they could never imagine. The first company I saved never made it into the papers, but for me, it was the beginning of a quiet revolution. I named my firm Northbridge Partners, a name bland enough not to attract attention from those in my family who could sniff out power, but with a clear meaning. I was a bridge builder, linking despair and hope, collapse and rebirth. My first office was on the 3rd floor of a Mexican restaurant in Flatbush, Brooklyn. Sweltering in summer, leaky in the rain and soaked in the smell of grilled meat. But I loved it like a firstborn. Within those yellowing walls, I rewrote the definition of failure. I handpicked every hire, not based on flashy resumes, but on instinct. I chose people who could listen, stay quiet when needed, and move fast when opportunity flashed. Every employee signed an NDA I wrote myself, 3 pages, no fluff. But firm enough to make anyone think twice before speaking out. My name didn't appear anywhere. In all legal documents, I was listed as a non-operating minority shareholder. The public-facing executive was a contract attorney I hired, with no decision-making power unless authorized by me. I was the CEO. But only in the shadows. I hired a woman named Grace, former operations manager for a supermarket chain, as my admin assistant. When I met partners, I was Sophia, market analyst. When clients called, I was Sophia from strategic support. No one ever asked me, "Who are you really?" I did it for one clear reason. I didn't want the name Becker to ruin everything I built. My family, with their Becker Enterprises empire spanning real estate and finance, had a nasty habit: hunting down dying companies, buying them for pennies, stripping the assets, and tossing the ashes. They called it asset optimization. I called it stealing a company's soul. 1 year after founding Northbridge, I got a strange call from a small print shop in New Jersey, on the verge of collapse after an investment group pulled out suddenly. I went in, read the paperwork, and saw the name BKR Acquisitions, LLC on the controlling shareholder list. I nearly threw the whole file on the floor. BKR was a subsidiary of Becker Enterprises. At that moment, I knew I'd found my real mission. Not just saving small businesses, but cutting off the claws of my own family. I restructured that print shop in 3 months, cut costs, renegotiated the lease, got them online with on-demand printing, revenue up 38% in 2 quarters. More importantly, they were strong enough to say no to BK. From then on, I tracked every deal Becker Enterprises touched. Same names, same tactics. I quietly reached out from Northbridge to companies they planned to swallow. Not all trusted me, but some accepted the lifeline. No fanfare. I dismantled takeovers with strategy, data, and absolute silence. After 3 years, Northbridge opened its first branch in Chicago, then Dallas, then Denver, each under a different subsidiary name, all with my identity hidden. Every time I signed a contract with a company on the brink of being taken over, it felt like I was snatching a soul from the hands of death. And that death bore the name Becker. The funny thing is, once Uncle Henry himself walked into my Denver office to meet a potential client. I stood in the corner, holding a notebook, taking notes, head down, plain shirt, hair neatly tied back. And he didn't recognize me. "You there, where's the coffee?" he barked. I nodded and fetched it, then stood behind him, listening as he boasted about his ability to rescue markets with aggressive acquisition strategies. I smiled, a smile no one saw. I had built an empire. Not by being a Becker, but by being everything they were not. 10 years had passed, and no one in my family knew that the insignificant secretary they once dismissed was the very person who had been blocking them for a decade. And they were about to find out. Because the game was about to flip. The message popped up on my phone at exactly 10:37 p.m. that night, just as I was wiping off the last of my makeup after the family gathering. Urgent, Becker Capital requests a merger meeting with Williams, MFG, Northbridge CEO required to attend. 9 a.m. tomorrow. I stared at the screen, then I smiled, not the polite, tight-lipped smile I'd worn all evening in my neutral-toned black dress. This was real. Triumphant, bitter, and liberating. Finally, they had come to the right door. Becker Capital, Uncle Henry's flagship company, had been chasing Williams Manufacturing for over a year, stalking every stock dip, every operational hiccup, waiting to pounce. But 3 months ago, Williams quietly signed a contract with Northbridge Partners. Since then, I had been the only person authorized to approve any merger or restructuring related to them. They didn't know that the damn consulting firm in their way was me. The next morning, I chose a charcoal gray suit, crisp white high-collar shirt, and black velvet heels. No jewelry, no unnecessary accessories. Just power and silence in every movement. Northbridge HQ was at 72 Spring Street, 27th floor, a modern glass building in the heart of Manhattan. No name on the door, no giant logo screaming for attention. We didn't need to flaunt. We were the shadow that big corporations feared facing, but couldn't avoid. Grace, now our chief operating officer, was waiting by the elevator. "The Becker team's here, your cousin. Carter looks tense. They're demanding the CEO, no one else. Perfect. The coffee ready? I asked, lips curling slightly. Their usual. Straight from that cafe chain you bought last month. I already told the receptionist, the assistant will bring it in. I nodded, adjusting my collar. Time to step on stage. The conference room doors opened at 8:58. The air inside was thick, tense as a drawn bow. Uncle Henry sat at the head of the table, shoulders square like a bronze statue, his familiar face now wearing an unfamiliar edge of urgency. On his right was Mason, my cousin, still fiddling with his phone. On his left sat Becker Capital's attorney, and across from them was Williams' representative, Mr. Joe Holloway, the same man who'd called me in the middle of the night 3 months ago, begging for one last shot to save his company. Everyone turned as I walked in, my velvet heels nearly silent against the polished hardwood. Grace followed behind, carrying a stack of documents. "Who are you?" Henry asked immediately, frowning. "We asked to meet the CEO, not an assistant." I walked to the head of the table, across from him, and sat without rushing. I opened my iPad and brought up the merger deck I'd finalized the night before. "You're looking at her," I said, calm and clear. "I'm Sophia Becker, CEO of Northbridge Partners, the one overseeing the entire restructuring of Williams Manufacturing." Silence dropped heavy in the room. Mason looked up, his mouth slightly open, words caught somewhere inside. "No way," Henry growled. "You're a secretary, a junior staffer, the one who quietly blocked 4 of your acquisitions over the past 3 years. I cut in, eyes locked on his. Peterson Logistics, Aerotech, Greenline Foods, and now Williams. All rescued. Before you could gut them. You think this is a game? You're playing with the entire family." Mason shot up. "This is a joke, right? Some staged act?" I snapped my fingers. Grace immediately pulled up the financial overview on the large screen. "Northbridge currently manages over $84 billion in corporate assets. We hold a 91% restructuring success rate. The documents in front of you are the only conditions under which a merger with Williams can proceed. Without me, this deal dies on the spot." Henry's face turned purple with rage. He looked at me as if I had just killed the soul of the family. "You dare destroy everything we've built?" "I'm not destroying. I'm rebuilding. I'm fixing what you people only know how to ruin for profit." Joe Holloway cleared his throat softly. "If it weren't for Sophia, Williams wouldn't even be here today. I'm not discussing a merger with anyone else but her." I turned the iPad screen toward them, a half smile on my face. "You have 17 minutes to decide. If you don't sign, I'll start buying Becker Capital shares on the market. I've already set up the investment fund for it." Mason collapsed into his chair, eyes wide like they were about to fall out. Henry stared at me, as if trying to find the girl who once stood at his office door 10 years ago, trembling as she handed him a business plan that got torn apart in 5 minutes. Now that girl was sitting at the head of the table, holding all the cards. "I hope you still read contracts carefully before signing, Uncle Henry," I said, sliding the documents toward him. "Because this isn't an offer. It's the final condition." Uncle Henry clenched his jaw but didn't touch the leather-bound folder lying on the table. Mason sat frozen, while their attorney's hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages. The air in the room was so thick, one spark would have been enough to set it ablaze. I stood up and walked to the screen. With one light tap on the tablet, the full profile of Northbridge Partners appeared. Growth charts, a list of successful restructurings, a network of branches in 14 cities, and the final number that drained color from every face in the room. $122 billion in assets under management. "We have a 94% success rate in corporate restructuring over the past 5 years," I said, letting my gaze sweep across the room. "And starting tomorrow, if this deal isn't signed on time, Northbridge will activate our asset protection fund to begin purchasing every available share of Becker Capital on the open market. "You're threatening us?" Mason growled. I turned back and looked him straight in the eye. "I'm not threatening, I'm offering a less painful path for everyone, but if you want to call it a threat, I won't stop you." Uncle Henry slammed his hand on the table. "You're my blood." "A Becker! You turn your back on this family for some cheap power play?" "I didn't turn my back on the family turned its back on me 10 years ago, when you shredded my business plan, threw it in the trash and told me I should learn how to make coffee. Today, I'm just handing you a different kind of document, one that actually holds value." Grace, as planned, stepped forward and distributed an additional document, the restructuring plan for Becker Capital post-merger. I let them read in silence for nearly 2 minutes before continuing. "We're not destroying Becker Capital. We'll retain the efficient divisions, eliminate controversial acquisitions, and rebuild from the ground up. You can stay on as an advisor, but executive authority will shift to a new board, appointed by Northbridge." Mason shot up. "You can't do that. We're family, we're founders. And that's exactly why you think you're exempt from reality. But in this room, we're talking corporate law, not family ties. Northbridge now holds enough financial power to dominate the market, and Williams Manufacturing is just one piece of our broader strategy. If you refuse to cooperate, we're ready to do this the harder way." Becker's lawyer leaned in to whisper something to Uncle Henry, who continued staring at me like he'd just been punched in the face. His expression twisted, then loosened, like a defeated man forced to swallow bitter truth. "You planned all of this from the start," he muttered. 10 years. Just to take down your own blood." "No, Uncle," I replied, my voice calm and cold. "I spent 10 years building something that was actually worth something. You brought yourself down long ago. I just happened to arrive in time to clean up the mess." Grace signaled and the technician shut off the presentation screen. I looked at the clock. "You have until 5 p.m. today to sign the agreement. If not, the automatic share buy orders will be triggered at 9 a.m. tomorrow." I gathered my documents and stood. "One more thing, Uncle Henry. The wine you drank at last night's party from that Napa Valley vineyard is now owned by Northbridge. I bought it last month." "And the cafe whose coffee you demanded this morning?" "That chain is one of my investments too." I stopped at the door, my eyes sweeping over both Mason and my uncle. "The truth is, I don't hate my family. I've just stopped tolerating being trampled by people who think I only belong on the sidelines." The door closed behind me. Silent. Steady. And finally, free. In the elevator, Grace handed me a latte. "From your cafe chain, custom blend." I took the cup and inhaled deeply. Tastes better knowing I'm not the one delivering it anymore. That afternoon, at exactly 4:52 p.m., the Becker Capital Board of Directors sent an email confirming acceptance of all terms in the merger agreement with Northbridge Partners. No apology, no extra words. Just a dry PDF file. Heavy with the weight of surrender and despair. I printed it, placed it on the desk, and sat quietly for a few minutes. Not to savor the victory, but to close a chapter that had weighed on me for a decade. That night my name, Sophia Becker, was officially updated in Northbridge's public records as the founding CEO. And the next morning, every major business paper ran the headline. "The woman once labeled a secretary takes over the family empire with a strategy both insane and brilliant. Becker falls, Northbridge rises to lead the game." I didn't read them all, just skimmed, then tossed my phone on the desk. I didn't need those articles to prove I had done it. The only person who ever needed to know was me. And I'd known for a long time. 3 days later, Mason was forced to step down from the board. The shareholders no longer trusted a man who sat in a boardroom and failed to realize he was wearing pajamas in a room full of wolves. James, the cousin in charge of finance, fared even worse. An internal audit by Northbridge revealed his involvement in 2 insider trading investments. Not enough for criminal charges, but enough to end his career. He was placed on indefinite leave and removed from all executive functions. And Uncle Henry? He sat in stunned silence at the first meeting in his new role as powerless advisor. No chairman's seat, no voting rights. No one obligated to obey. He sat there, eyes locked on me, as if trying to figure out how the girl he once banished to the mailroom was now at the head of the table, making decisions in his place. I didn't return that look. I simply led. Issued restructuring directives, trimmed bloated divisions, rebuilt core values. And most importantly, changed the culture. We introduced a comprehensive equality policy. Women could run for any leadership position in what was now the Northbridge Becker Group. Every department had to include at least one representative from underrepresented communities. All new investment contracts came with corporate ethics clauses. I dismantled Uncle Henry's top floor office, once the symbol of his power, and turned it into a co-working space for women-founded startups. I named it The Summit. At the launch press conference for our new strategy, I didn't stand on stage alone. Next to me was Grace, the woman who had once been an assistant, now our chief operating officer. Beside her were 3 young women leaders who had previously been denied promotions under the old Becker regime. I made it clear. Northbridge, Becker, doesn't exist to dominate the market. We exist to change how the market operates. From exploitation to empowerment. From exclusion to inclusion. That same month, a letter arrived at my office. No title, just labeled, "To Sophia." The handwriting was shaky, but familiar. I've lived wrong for most of my life. I thought I was building something, but I was only destroying. You showed me that strength doesn't come from the loudest voice, but from the most persistent action. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm asking you to keep going. Henry. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond. To me, forgiveness doesn't require words. It lies in showing him the right path he never chose. A week later, I attended a conference at my old school, where I'd earned my MBA. As I entered the auditorium, I was surprised to see my mother sitting in the front row. My mom was the only one in the family who never laughed when I talked about my dreams. She didn't help me start my company, didn't fund anything, but she didn't stop me either. And maybe, that was more than enough. That day, I ended my speech with just one sentence. If someone ever underestimates you, don't waste your breath trying to prove them wrong. Build something they can't comprehend, until they're forced to look. 3 weeks after the merger was announced, I unintentionally became a household name across both business and mainstream media. I, Sophia Becker, the one once labeled the shadow in the power room, was now dubbed the anonymous female CEO behind a billion-dollar empire. Forbes named me one of the top 10 most influential figures in corporate restructuring for 2025. CNBC aired a nearly 40-minute feature titled "The Woman Who Took Down Her Family, with Quiet Strategy and Cold Precision." I read all those words with a strange feeling. Not joy, not pride. Just like watching a version of myself being dissected, analyzed, and put on display, for sale, in the marketplace of opinions. While the world was talking about me like a symbol, the one person I wanted to hear from the most remained silent. Until one night. The message came while I was sitting on the 27th floor balcony, watching the stream of people below, tiny as ants. My phone buzzed once, and I saw the name that made my heart skip. Mom. Just one line. I always knew you'd prove your worth. But what makes me proudest is that you never needed anyone's approval to know you were enough. I buried my face in my hands, eyes burning. After all these years of fighting, pushing forward, silently swallowing every bitter word, I had never cried. But that message, from the woman who left the Becker house when I was 13, with nothing but empty hands and unwavering faith in her little girl, cracked the ice inside me. Since my identity went public, Northbridge's inbox overflowed with speaking invitations, interviews, partnership offers. But what mattered most to me wasn't in those lists. It was the handwritten emails, the hastily folded letters, the shaky texts from young women, many I'd never met, calling me their inspiration. A 26-year-old from Minnesota. I was denied a promotion because I didn't communicate well enough with the male leadership. But because of you, I won't give up. A single mom from Texas. I used to think women like me would always just be assistants. You made me believe I deserve more. An MBA student from California. I keep a picture of you in my phone to remind myself every morning. They don't have to believe in me. I just have to believe long enough for them to not be able to deny it. I printed those letters and covered the glass wall of my private office with them. I called it the wall of proof. Not proof of success, but of real impact. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at the Women Rebuild Business 2025 conference in San Francisco. For the first time, I stood on stage not as CEO of Northbridge, but as a woman who had once been dismissed, laughed at, and made invisible in her own family. The room was silent as I spoke about that year, the year I walked out of Uncle Henry's office with a shredded business plan in my bag, swearing I would never beg again. I didn't sugarcoat anything, didn't use fancy language, I just told the truth. I'm not great. I'm just a little more persistent than most. And one thing I know for sure. If you're a woman in a world not designed for you, you have to be the one to redesign it. When I finished, the applause lasted nearly a full minute. Not applause for admiration, but for recognition. They weren't clapping for me. They were clapping for themselves, and for everyone who'd ever been told they were not good enough. After that speech, I launched a scholarship program called Legacy from the Margins for girls dismissed because of their background, their gender, or because they didn't follow the traditional path. Within 3 months, over 2,000 applications poured in. And in every one was a story, a dream that had never been allowed to speak. I read every single one, not a single one missed. One late afternoon, as I was reviewing the final shortlist, Grace walked into the room with a very peculiar smile. "There's a surprise guest waiting for you in the conference room." "Who is it?" I asked, without looking up from the file. "Someone who once told you to learn how to make coffee before dreaming of becoming a CEO." I looked up. My heart wasn't pounding, I just felt at peace. Let him wait 5 more minutes. Let him know what it feels like to be dismissed. Grace nodded and stepped out. And I, Sophia Becker, the one once labeled invisible, stayed seated under the golden sunset, continuing to read applications. Because the empire I built wasn't for revenge, but to revive suffocated dreams, one person at a time. 3 months after the merger, Uncle Henry submitted his official retirement letter. No farewell party, no ceremony. Just a thick envelope, neatly placed on my desk, delivered through Grace on a Monday morning. I opened it while sipping coffee, the most expensive blend from my own chain, his former favorite. The first page was a dry legal document, but the second page, handwritten in strong but slightly shaky script, made me pause. "Sophia, I once thought I was teaching you a lesson in reality, but in truth, you were the one who made me rethink everything. I used to measure success by profit, control, and domination. But you chose to build, protect, and restore. I didn't understand that, not until it all fell apart. You didn't just prove your capability, you taught me something I never learned in my whole life. Real strength comes from knowing how to limit your own power. Thank you for not being like me. And thank you for doing it right, Henry." I folded the letter and placed it in the top drawer, alongside my mother's message and the handwritten notes from young women I had once helped. Not to preserve the past, but to remind myself, whenever I start to doubt, the best revenge is becoming the version they never thought could exist. As December approached, a strange idea came to me. The Becker family gathering. I, the one who had been left off the decision-makers list at every party, who once stood in the kitchen pouring wine for people who couldn't even remember my job title, now owned the very empire they thought would be passed from father to son. And I decided, this year I would host that gathering. The venue? Not Aunt Lorraine's mansion, not Mason's yacht, and definitely not the usual 5-star hotel. I chose the 27th floor conference room of Northbridge Becker headquarters. The room where I once stood behind a door, quietly taking notes, where I once carried coffee no one cared to acknowledge. I ordered the room to be cleared and redecorated. Not lavish, not flashy. The old leather chairs were replaced with handcrafted wooden seats. On the walls, I hung photos of the companies we had saved from bankruptcy, each a testament to faith in the survival of small business. At the center of the room was a round table. No head seat, because from now on, no one gets to sit above others just because they bear the name Becker. When they began arriving, Mason, James, Aunt Lorraine, even some I hadn't seen in over 5 years. The air was tense and cold at first. I smiled. Welcome to the new home, where everyone sits as equals. Mason looked around, trying to hide his discomfort. Are you really planning to make this the new tradition? No, I replied. I'm not creating tradition. I'm breaking the wrong ones to start something better. Aunt Lorraine let out a faint laugh, this time without sarcasm. Well, the food is excellent. So is the coffee. From your investments, right? All from businesses that once nearly went bankrupt, now they're strategic partners of Northbridge. That night, after everyone had left, I stood alone in the conference room. Cold wind swept in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, carrying memories buried in a decade. I walked to the corner of the room, where 5 years ago I had once stood, nervously holding a tray of drinks. I placed my hand on the table. It felt cold, solid, and familiar. Only this time, I didn't have to bow. I stood tall. The next morning, Grace walked into the office with a copy of the Wall Street Journal. On the front page was a photo of me standing among a crowd of young women entrepreneurs, a soft smile on my lips, fire in my eyes. The headline read, "The woman once forgotten, now reshaping the future of business." Grace placed the paper on the desk, smiling. "Did you read it?" I shook my head, turning my chair toward the window. "No need. I don't need anyone's validation anymore. I have an entire empire running on the vision I wrote down 10 years ago. That's enough." I, Sophia Becker, was not just a CEO. I was someone who had once been rejected, buried, and rendered invisible. And now I stepped into the light, not to be seen, but to light the way for those still hidden. My story began in silence. But it will continue with the voices of thousands more. And this time, no one will be left behind a closed door. The story of Sophia Becker is a living testament that persistence, intelligence, and resilience can overcome any prejudice or barrier, even those built by your own family. Dismissed, excluded, and denied for a decade, she didn't choose revenge through hatred, but built an empire through quiet, unwavering action. In a world where women are often cast into secondary roles, Sophia proved that true power doesn't come from the seat you're given, but the one you create for yourself. What do you think about Sophia's journey and her courageous choices? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow our channel for more heartfelt, real-life stories about family and resilience.